Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, is there a teacher shortage in a school near you? And imagine this, standardized testing is back in the news, but first, yes, they have not yet approved a revenue package for the enacted state budget, some $32 billion. I think that was maybe 10 years ago. I'm joking. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, it wouldn't be Pennsylvania Newsmakers if somehow, some way, we didn't talk about the Pennsylvania budget. The spending portion has not been enacted. Sitting across from me, as often is the case, is Angela Couloumbis. She writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer. She also has spent most of her life now covering the state budget, I think. Is that right, Angela?
It feels like Groundhog Day, really, every year.
Every year, Here we go again, yeah. All right, well, let's get this straight for people, and I'll let you get into the important change. The legislature agreed and the governor to spend $32 billion.
That's right.
Admittedly, there's a $2.2 billion shortfall.
Right.
Correct?
Correct.
Meaning, and that's just in the revenues that come in, balancing the budget last year and this year.
Yep.
So we got that straight. But they haven't agreed on a plan to come up with the $2.2 billion and the House...
To pay for it.
To pay for it, yeah. So first of all, tell our viewers, the House had a bill and the Senate this past week said, no way, we're not going along with it.
Right.
What was the Senate's problem with the House bill?
The Senate's problem fundamentally is that it relies on transfers from these special funds that are off the budget books that effectively fund everything from environmental cleanup programs to transportation programs to mass transit. And these funds have balances that the Republicans in the House feel should be drawn on.
Drawn on, okay.
Critics of that say, well, there may be balances in these funds, but the money is committed and they go towards very important essential programs, and that if you take it away, you're effectively taking these essential programs away from residents who rely on them.
So they would argue, the critics would argue it's a cut.
It's a cut, and also that it does not address the issue that you've heard Governor Wolf trumpeting day in and day out, which is we need some sort of new, reliable form of revenue coming in. And this is not a reliable form of revenue.
Okay, very good. And plus, they're also dealing again with a tobacco settlement. That was a settlement reached with the tobacco companies, 8, 9 years, or whatever it was, a long time ago. And that money goes into health care programs. And they want to sell off portions of that. We don't have to get into that in detail, but that's the other big way that they're going to come up with the $2.2 billion, correct?
Correct. And on the Senate side, they have also talked about borrowing against that tobacco settlement fund. And
over $1 billion.
Over $1 billion. And that becomes an interesting issue now, the whole issue of borrowing as a way to deal with a budget, because a credit rating agency yesterday downgraded Pennsylvania's bond rating, which means it's going to be more expensive to borrow money going forward.
So the state's going to pay more to borrow more. And that's going to add to the debt, obviously, to the, can I say this, the fiscal peril the state happens to be in. All right, let's go to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter, when it's all done, when we get out of, push the weeds aside, the Senate and the governor agreed on a revenue package that had some new revenues in, what we call gross receipts tax. So our viewers, they would be paying more on their electric bills, on their telephone bills. In addition, they had a modest, maybe the energy people won't like the term modest, but they had a modest tax on
drillers,
the severance tax it's called, right? What,
correct.
2%, I think.
Yeah, I believe it may have been 1%, but I'd have to go back and look.
But a modest tax. So there's taxes in the Senate bill. The House says no. Do I got that right? No new taxes at all.
Yes. And I think that this is really a kind of interesting take on and look at the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, because it is very divided. It is very split. The idea of moderate Republicans becoming less and less of a political factor.
Yeah.
They don't have as much of a voice.
Right.
More of the Republican Party, at least at the state level,
right.
Their policies are being driven by the more conservative faction of the party.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to continue and ask, here we are, we're June 30 was the budget deadline. We're pushing October, and one Senate leader said he looked like it's going to get done by the beginning of October or the very end of September. Plus something else that I was not even aware of that Angela pointed out, are you going to be able to register to vote if you're not a citizen? That ought to be an interesting question, and I'll try to get an answer after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Back to the program, we're talking about the failure to enact a spending bill or program attached to the budget that the state legislature passed, and then we're going to talk with Dolores McCracken from the Pennsylvania State Education Association on teacher shortage, standardized testing. We got a lot to get into with her, but first back to Angela Couloumbis, our guest. She's a writer with the Philadelphia Inquirer. She covers the state capitol. All right, Angela, I'm going to really put you on the spot. Of course, we do that all the time here.
Sure.
How is this going to get resolved?
I don't think anybody knows at this point. Really what needs to happen is, the House Republicans need to figure out what can be an acceptable compromise to, it may not be a majority of their members, but to a portion of their members.
The Democrats would support them.
Correct.
And so they have, what, a 21-seat margin in the House, so they'd have to get, 21, 23, 25 votes to get it passed. Well, here's the question that I have. Right now, not a single state service has been curtailed.
Right.
No programs have been abbreviated. Every single state employee is on the job. And as a result of that, there's no pressure on the lawmakers, or am I wrong? Is there any pressure on these lawmakers from their constituents?
No, and as we've talked about many a time, I don't think that this issue resonates with a lot of people when they're sitting at their breakfast table, reading the news or listening to the news. I do think that there is a pressure point coming up at the end of October, which is when certain payments are made to school districts.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the more needy school districts that rely on state aid will really be hurt if they do not get, if Wolf has to freeze that.
And so one of the things that I'm familiar with is Governor Wolf said, because technically the state has run out of money, the state treasurer, Joe Torsello, says, I'm not picking up my pen and signing so you can borrow money. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
So Governor Wolf says, well, I'm not going to pay the 7 insurers that do the Medicaid coverage. So the folks who are on Medicaid, according to the insurers, they're going to have to borrow the money, but they're not going to cut off services, vital health care services to Medicaid recipients, correct?
That's correct. And it is a strain because there is another Medicaid payment to those insurers coming up again next month, mid-next month. So there are some repercussions, and the longer it goes, it does begin to impact people, trickle down, and really impact taxpayers.
And the one other point is that the payment that would normally be made to the two pension systems, the one for state employees and one for teachers and school employees, that won't be made. So, but your point is this, to the viewers out there who receive all these services, in the next week or so,
There's nothing that's really going to push this over. There's no pressure point that's going to push it over the top.
All right, I got to ask you this before I let you go. I read all the time about the question of whether, let's say, immigrants, illegal immigrants, immigrants not citizens, can they vote? Some states are moving towards that, which would allow them to register so they should vote. That has come up in the state of Pennsylvania. This is the first time I'm hearing.
And voter fraud, which was a big issue during the presidential campaign.
Gosh, it's still a big issue.
Sure, it is.
It keeps getting raised.
Yesterday in Philadelphia, a city commissioner who helps oversee elections came out and actually dropped this bombshell, basically said that because of a PennDOT glitch, there were legal permanent residents, not citizens, who were registered to vote when they shouldn't have been, and about half of those people actually voted in elections.
Wow.
It also came out that the Department of State, the Pennsylvania Department of State, which oversees elections, has known about this at least since, for it sounds like 4 or 5 months, if not longer.
Wow.
And so this is now coming out in the open, and obviously this is red meat for a lot of people because very controversial. And the interesting thing about it is that it appears to have come to light because some of these legal residents are now gaining citizenship. And one of the questions that they're asked is, have you ever voted?
Have you ever voted?
In a U.S. And they're scared because they realize.
Wow.
So we don't know the scope of the problem yet.
I understand that, but we'll continue to follow that. Well, look, thanks for coming in. Great update. All right, as I indicated before, is there a teacher shortage? What about these standardized tests? We're going to get into that with Dolores McCracken. She heads the Pennsylvania State Education Association. We'll be back after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Well, Doris McCracken joins me. She's the new president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. First time on the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, what did you do before you took over the head of the PSEA?
Well, it's an interesting story. I began a career 20 years. I was in a 6th grade learning support classroom in the Council Rock School District. And during my time working as a support staff member, I'm not a teacher, I was a paraprofessional.
Okay.
I got very involved in my local association, became president of a 500-member local. Found myself as the treasurer of the support staff statewide region, which put me on the PSEA Board of Directors, and 6 years after that, I became treasurer. 4 years later, vice president, and now here I am.
I'll tell you something. I've been a college professor all my life, but I was in the social science, MS, bachelor's in education, basically, even though I was in an academic department. The toughest job in education is teaching middle school, because those kids aren't quite adults yet, and they're not kids anymore, and they're going through all these changes. Man, was that tough. A student taught in the 8th grade, but we're going to get on to the issue at hand here for our viewers. Enough of that. All right, let's talk about standardized testing as first. No Child Left Behind is gone, and we have this Every Student Succeed Act that is currently being implemented by the Wolf administration. I think so far so good. What do our viewers, with testing, that's all they hear. In simple language, what's this all about for our viewers?
The plan that's being submitted to the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. Pennsylvania has developed a plan. We're very, very excited that we actually had educators who sat on work groups and talked about what does this need to look at. And when it comes to standardized testing, we have been living the one test fits all students. Every student, every teacher, every school, every district is judged by that one test.
And we know often, I hate to say this, and you may disagree, but there was some teaching to the test. I mean, that was to be expected, wasn't it?
I think there is absolutely.
That an exaggeration?
No, there is
Am
absolutely.
I exaggerating
No,
that?
you're not. There is absolutely teaching to the test. There are computer programs that school districts can purchase that help students prepare to take the test. Everyone knows what will be tested. There is no test in social studies.
No, wait a minute, that's my field. No,
there is no PSSA. There is no state social studies assessment currently. In elementary school, you're tested grades 3, and then middle school grades 3 through 8 in reading, language arts, math, and you're also tested in science when you are in the 4th and 8th grades.
So basically what you're saying is test, 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 and in the end a lot of it is teaching to the test. Well, how is this all going to change? What's this plan that's now being considered by the, education folks here and in D.C.?
Reduce the testing by 20%.
Reduce it. That's the standardized testing.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Right now, our students and our teachers spend approximately 110 hours just on standardized testing. Reduce that by 20% and use the test, but you don't use it to punish. Don't use it to punish students. Don't use it to punish teachers, schools, school districts. We pit teacher against teachers, school against school, district against district, and it is a snapshot in time, a test that a student takes on a particular day, maybe having come to school that day, not having had a good experience at home, and that affects their entire day.
I want to ask you about where all this goes. Where will the test be under the new plan? We're going to run to a break, and then when we come back, I'll get into that. I also want to talk about this teacher shortage thing. It's something that I think a lot of folks are not aware of, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Well, I'm chatting with Dolores McCracken. We're talking about these teacher assessment programs. It's amazing. I don't think most of us realized how much is going on. And here's some information you provided. 12 hours classroom time spent taking PSSAs and Keystone exams each year. 20 to 50 hours spent on overall assessments, up to 110 hours in practice time?
In lost instructional time.
I mean, you're practicing, therefore you're not.
Yes, lost instructional time.
Now, what's going to change? How often are you going to do these new, the new testing program that the governor?
Well, hopefully with the reduction and under ESSA, with a dashboard approach, so that one test does not judge a student, a teacher, a building.
Right.
With that approach, there will be other considerations that go into how school districts are rated. So it will no longer be you get one score based on one test.
So they're going to be, the bigger point here is for everybody, tests aren't ending. You're still going to get, people are still going to get tests, right? There's still going to be the PSSAs, the Keystone, right? Testing will still continue.
The testing will still happen. But the scores that school districts get will take into consideration other factors, chronic absenteeism, English language learners.
How could you not want to look at the whole picture? How could you just say, well, we're just going to take this test and not look at a whole? Who would do that?
And that's been the argument that our teachers have been making for over a decade. They teach the whole student. They teach the whole child, and yet they hand a standardized test to a child who has probably had differentiated instruction through their school career.
Do testing, but use other considerations.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
And there's no feedback for the teacher. When a teacher gives a quiz, that quiz drives their instruction. They know. My fifth graders didn't understand percentages. I need to do another lesson on percentages.
Yeah.
These tests do not provide any meaningful information to the classroom teacher.
Yeah. I mean, look, we all study as a college professor for many years. How many did my students not study for the test? You know, on the material. But I think overall you look for, and you know, and I want to make this point. We are not saying testing is not important.
No, we're not saying that at all.
We're not saying that at all. Okay, I want to make that clear. All right, before I let you go, I got to get into this subject of, here we go. We know that that Pennsylvania's population is declining in real terms now, not just in relative terms to other states. That's point number one. Point number two, we know it's declining in certain parts of the state over other parts of the state. How? But I never thought that we'd be talking about a teacher shortage. What's the fundamental problem?
I think it's a variety of reasons. I think that PSEA testing, the overuse of test, does not make the teaching career as attractive to our young teachers. They walk into a classroom, they believe they're going to make a difference. And their curriculum everything they do is driven by a PSEA test. Mm-hmm. So they will go into the teaching profession, they're not staying, and what they're saying is, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I thought teaching would be.
So you don't think the problem is that not enough people are in the teacher training programs and going into teaching initially? You think the problem more than anything else is that they're in it and then they drop?
No, I think that's secondary. I think initially it is because that we have such a loss in students enrolling in those teacher prep colleges. We have less certificates being issued. I
Could it be related to salary? Could it be related? Look, teaching is very, very difficult. I don't care what I know. I'm biased here. I'm not impartial. Having spent my time around, in education my whole career. Tell me, is that?
I think when you're a college student looking for a career and you're thinking about teaching, you're not oblivious to what's said about teachers. It is not the profession. They're not treated as the professionals that they are. They are blamed for a lot of what happens in our schools. They're blamed for a lot of what happens in our state budget, and they don't want to be part of that.
Thanks, I appreciate this. We'll see what reaction we get. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.